Oh, now.
Hello everyone, this is the Bridge from Math, Dr. B. Today we're going over an interesting equation called a radical equation. In many algebra textbooks they'll call it the other type of equation, kind of like the movie The Other Guys with Mark Wahlberg and Will Ferrell. But that's another thing to do after you do the math. So the question here is solve the following for x. The ultimate in algebra, finding that x. We have the square root of 8 minus 2x minus x equals 0. Now I want to point something out. The thing that makes this challenging is this square root sign. It has a fancy name called a radical sign because you can have third roots and other things. But this is a square root sign. Generally students are comfortable with that. But the reason why it's so difficult to find the value for x is it is kind of trapped under the square root. Now, the secret to it is you want to get the radical, the square root sign, by itself. So you want to isolate this radical. How do we do that? This minus x is causing problems, isn't it? It's kind of hanging out. We need to get that to the other side of the equation. So how can we do that? Let's look. Our answer. So if we want to remove the minus x and isolate the radical, all we're doing is we're adding x to both sides. Always remember the comfortable phrase, what you do to the left side, you better do to the right side. So the minus x plus x cancels to 0, so you have the radical, the square root of 8 minus 2x, all by itself. Now that's time to go get it. Notice the 0 is no longer on the right side, you have 0 plus x. Now the reason you got it by itself is you can do something really powerful, often called the power property of equations. Basically raise both sides of the equation to the second power. So we can remove this radical by squaring both sides of the equation. Notice I put parentheses here to show you need to square everything on the left side of the equation and square everything on the right side of the equation. What's the beauty of squaring a square root? Well, the square root will go away. It cancels it out. What happens when you square x? It becomes x squared. So let's follow this answer and see where it goes. Now, notice the square root's gone. You have 8 minus 2x equals x squared. What did you just find? What just happened there? It went from an other type of equation to a quadratic equation. Now, quadratic equation, that's bread and butter. We need to be able to tackle that. In this question, you're going to find out we're going to solve it by factoring. But let me back up a few steps because I want to give you a lot of details. The quadratic equation in standard form looks like this. ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Now notice these letters, and a lot of students get nervous when they look at formulas because all the letters. Don't get nervous. These letters actually are just representing numbers. They're called coefficients of a polynomial. In this case, it's a second degree polynomial, also known as a quadratic equation. We want always to equal 0. When you're fact solving by factoring, whether you're solving by the quadratic formula, you want the quadratic equation equal to 0. So let's get this to equal 0 right here. So you might notice something. I'm actually going to take the 8 minus 2x and move it to the right side. And I just tell you, honor and respect the squared term. That's the term I usually like to keep positive, and I like to keep it non-messed with. So let's look at who we're going to take on. We're going to take 8, subtract 8 from both sides. We're going to add positive 2x. And lo and behold, now we have x squared plus 2x minus 8 equals 0. Now I know some students are going, wow, why didn't you bring the x squared over here? Let me remind you. That would have made it negative x squared, and it would have caused a little bit more challenge in factoring. If you used the quadratic formula, you'd have been okay. But for this one, just go with me. I have like what I call habits I think could help you. So I like to keep the x squared positive when I'm looking at it. In this case, this quadratic equation is pretty easy to solve by factoring. I'm not going to really tell you all about factoring, but you might remember if there's no number in front of the x squared, all you have to do is come up with two numbers that multiply to give me negative 8 and add it to the positive 2. Lo and behold, plus 4 minus 2. 4 times negative 2 gives you negative 8. Do you remember your foiling? 4 times x is 4x. Negative 2 times x is negative 2x. You add these like terms, come back up to 2x. So we've successfully factored this. Now, by the zero product property, fancy way of saying how can I solve for that x now, it actually makes life good. Set these factors equal to 0. What value of x would make this piece 0? Well, how about x equals a positive 2? What's 2 minus 2? 0. 0 times anything gives you 0. So one possible answer is x equals 2. What about this factor? X plus 4. How would I make that term equal to 0? Correct. I need x equals a negative 4. Because a negative 4 plus 4 adds up to 0. So I have these two possible answers. Most students actually stop there, not realizing that when you square, back on the first step, when you squared both sides, you can often introduce extraneous solutions. That's a fancy way of saying a solution that may not be valid. So when you square both sides like we did to remove the radical, we need to check our answers. So let's try x equals negative 4 and see what happens. Go back to the original question, which was square root of 8 minus 2x minus x equals 0. Notice exactly the original question. Plug in wherever you see an x, the negative 4 that you found, see what happens. Well, when we plug in negative 4 wherever you see an x, we end up getting 8 minus 2 times negative 4. And minus minus gives you a plus. So this becomes the square root of 16. Then you have a minus an x, which is a minus a negative 4. Do you remember minus minus again? Gives me another plus 4. Is this equal to 0? 4 plus 4, does it equal 0? No. So what does that mean? It means x equals negative 4 is not a solution. Come over here and say, no, you're not a solution. Is x equals 2 is a solution? How would you do it? You'd plug in 2 wherever you see an x. I will tell you, you might just discover it is a solution, but I'm going to leave that to you. I believe in you, and my best to you, and good luck.